Hey everyone, welcome to this video for P8105, a course on data science. This is the first in a set of two videos that's going to focus on interactivity, and in particular today I'm going to be talking about making websites. I'm going to start by giving an introduction using slides, and after that I'm going to demonstrate by making a website in a screencast. Feel free to skip around and watch the parts of the video that are most useful for you. All the material is available at p8105.com, and there are links in the description. Awesome, let's get started. So we're going to be talking about making web pages. And before we talk about making web pages, we have to be clear about what a website is. And I know what you're thinking, I can almost hear it through the internet, but what you're thinking is, I know what a website is, I am watching this video on a website, and I got to this website after looking at other websites, and I've spent a lot of time on websites today and yesterday and in the whole course of my life. I know what a website is. I want to make you think for just a minute, when was the last time you carefully thought about how you would define a website? And so that's one of the things that we need to do is come up with a definition that is going to at least lay out the key components of a website that we have to be concerned about when it's time to make a website ourselves. So for our purposes, we're going to think about a website as a collection of related pages, obviously a landing page, but also often several other pages that contain related content. It's got to be written in HTML and hosted on a server so that a web browser, when you fire up Chrome, you fire up Firefox or whatever, you can navigate to a website, often using an easy to remember name, extract the HTML, get the HTML that you're interested in, and then have that HTML be rendered by your browser in a way that's human readable. So all of that is important. It's a collection of things written in HTML, put online somewhere that web browsers can get to, and that is then retrievable using something that is, if not easy to remember outright, if it's not going to be google.com or whatever, then it should at least be relatively easy to remember or to link to. Okay, so those are all the things that we're going to have to care about. The next thing before we talk about how to actually make a website is, why should you make a website? And I think there are a variety of reasons, and the first one that I'm going to start with is so you can have a personal site. Often this personal site is sort of like a online version of your resume. It's something like a website that you can put on your resume or in your email signature or whatever, so that somebody else can find you and you have some online presence that indicates who you are and what your background is and what kinds of things you've worked on and what projects you've done, and then give some additional links. Maybe you link to your GitHub profile so that people can see what kinds of work you do. Maybe you link to other pages, maybe you link to other things, right? But it's sort of a place where you can establish in an online way who you are so that somebody who is interested in learning more about you can find you and learn about you quickly and easily. Beyond that, there is often a need to have sites for projects. And so in some cases, that is just so that you can be clear, you can disseminate the findings that you've made out into the world. In some cases, it turns out that a web-based interface for a project is really required for the thing that you've done. If the goal of your project has been to create interactive graphics or a dashboard or maps that people can click around on, those aren't really things. You can't embed an interactive graphic into a PDF or a Word document, at least not easily. You can embed those in websites. You can put that into an HTML file, and that's sort of one of the goals, is to have a project page that allows you to take advantage of interactivity in a way that is often informative and intuitive and clear for users, that presents new information in a way through interaction. And sometimes you need a website to be able to do that. As an extension of that, if you have written R packages or you plan to, having a web page for those can often be a helpful thing to have. And then, sometimes the line between personal and professional is less clear. Maybe you want to blog about some stuff. Maybe you want to just put your opinions on the internet. That's a thing that people do. And you can do that either, if you're not happy with putting them on Facebook or Twitter or something else. Sometimes you want a long form blog where you can write about things that you want to do. And maybe that blog isn't like your opinions or something like this. Maybe it's like a blog about projects that you've done or quick things that you've thought about, right? There are all kinds of things that you can put on the internet. And if you want to put things on the internet, at some point you got to make a web page. Okay, great. So you're going to make a web page, and we know what a web page is, and it's going to have to be in HTML. And you might think to yourself like, oh, do I have to now learn what HTML is? Is that going to be a thing? And let me tell you, thankfully, no, you don't have to learn HTML. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. But before I do, I'm going to go on a short digression about the early days of the internet, when you really did, if you wanted to put something online, you had to learn HTML, because it was sort of like a God, it was just like a wild time back in the day. If you first wanted to access the internet, you had to like call the internet on the phone, on a landline. You had to tell your parents and your siblings, everybody get off the phone and don't call anybody because you wanted to go on the internet. And your modem would literally dial the internet, and you would hear this like bizarre screeching sound that was like the internet picking up the phone and saying hello, and you'd be like, okay, great, now I can go on the internet. And there was not an awful lot of internet at that time. There was no Google. So you would go to something like GeoCities, and GeoCities was this directory. It was just like a long list of all the websites that GeoCities knew about. And it would be like, all right, well, let's, I want to learn about movies today, so I'm going to go to the Hollywood GeoCities. Or I want to learn about like computers, so I'm going to go to Silicon Valley on GeoCities. And you would go there and it would just be like a list of 50 or 100 websites, and you'd like scroll through and you'd be like, well, today I'm going to click on, Jimmy's top 20 movies of all time website. And you click on it and it would just be basic HTML. Somebody had sat down, Jimmy, I guess, had sat down and he had written in HTML his opinions and his thoughts about whatever he thought the movies were. And then he put that online, and it was all like written in HTML. And I'm sort of describing this process, and depending on how old you are, you might kind of remember what it is. But it was wild at that time to think that you could sit down at a computer and access something that somebody else, somewhere, anywhere else in the world had written and put online. And that you could do the same thing if you were willing to sit down in front of a computer and open up a text browser and start typing like, here's my header information, and here's the body, and here's the paragraph, and here's the picture, and here's all this stuff. If you were willing to embed links yourself by hand, you could create a website and put it on the internet, and other people could see it as well. And this sort of, it was like a wild frontier in terms of what was happening, and nobody really knew what was going on, but it was really exciting all the time. And the downside, I guess, is that you would end up with stuff like this. This is sort of a bit extreme for what something on GeoCities might have looked like, but people would put like custom backgrounds, and you'd like put your cursor on the screen, and it would turn into like a hamster running around doing something. It was just like kind of weird what people were doing. You would see web page titles that would like flash between red and blue in such a way that it was almost blinding. You would look at it and like your eyeballs would hurt. And at some point, HTML decided you can't do that anymore. They made that kind of thing impossible, and probably, gosh, for good reason. So like that's the good old days of the internet, and at the same time, you should probably be glad that you don't ever have to actually learn HTML and navigate around using GeoCities or something like this. So, okay, great. Do you need to know HTML? No, you don't, because you already know R Markdown. If you sort of remember the process in R Markdown is the following. You write an R Markdown document. Sometimes it's got code, sometimes it doesn't have code. Maybe you're just writing some text that you're interested in. That goes to a Markdown document, and that gets rendered to several different formats. And those formats, you can get a Word document or a PDF or a GitHub document. And you can also export directly to HTML. And so the benefit here is that if you have spent enough time sort of getting familiar with R Markdown, you get HTML almost for free. And if you get HTML almost for free, you're learning a couple of additional things. Maybe we need to figure out how we're going to do links, and what are some additional pieces that you want for a website that's different from just like a report about a data set. Like, what are the additional pieces that you need? But we're getting websites almost for free, given that we've spent some time learning what R Markdown is and how to work with it. So we'll see some examples of that. So I like this page. I have stolen this slide directly from Jeff Leake, and it works for me because my name is Jeff and his name is Jeff, and it all still kind of makes sense. So here's this awesome website, and on the left-hand side, I'm showing the R Markdown document that hopefully is, there are a couple of pieces that are new, but the structure should be relatively familiar in the sense that I've got the header information with a title. I'm specifying the output. This is an HTML document, not a GitHub document or a PDF document. There are a few other pieces in here that specify options for the HTML document. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the screencast, but basically we're saying include a table of contents. Here's the table of contents, and the table of contents should sort of float off to the side as you scroll up and down. And then this theme cerulean is saying, well, this should be blue and this should be kind of bluish and the background should be white. And you can sort of cycle through themes if you want to change the look of a website. But then you get down into the body and you get a section header. This is Jeff's awesome website. Here's the section header, and here we're using a quick line of code that goes to the internet, goes to giphy.com, and embeds whatever this GIF is into my website. And so you can sort of map the structure of the R Markdown document into the website. And here I'm sort of referring to this as a website. It's not online necessarily, at least not yet, but it's being written in HTML and accessed through a web browser, reviewing this in Chrome or in Firefox or something like that, because it's rendering that HTML file for us, right? And you can see, well, there's the title here and the section title, and some GIF is being included here. And if I wanted to include code, I could do that. And if I wanted to export plots, I could do that too, okay? Okay, so you can use R Markdown to export HTML, and that's a big part of what you need to create a web page or a website. But you still have to host it somewhere where other people can find it, right? You could, I guess, create an HTML document that has an interactive graphic that you don't want to put out on the internet and just email that to somebody, and hopefully they'd be able to take a look at it also. But a lot of the times you want to be able to host your website online so that other people can get to what you're interested in. Other people can see the work that you've done. And hosting, you know, it can get complicated in some ways, but a lot of it is actually now pretty seamless. And in particular, places like GitHub allow you to host websites on GitHub. So we've been putting together repositories and putting them on GitHub and sort of treating this as a cloud-based place where everybody can go and see the kinds of reports that you're working on. Well, it turns out if you structure your repo appropriately, and you tell GitHub that this should be thought of, this repo should be thought of as a website, well then congratulations, it's now hosting a website. And somebody who goes to that website will see it as a website, not as like a list of code and other things in your repository. It'll just say, great, here is the website. The domain names are well structured, and what I mean by that is as long as you're sort of naming your repositories useful things and you remember what your GitHub username is, well, it's going to be at least reasonably clear what your the web page that goes along with a particular repo is, so that you go, instead of google.com, you go to like github.io/repo name, and you're kind of at the website that you need, right? So that's all really great. And then the workflow, I'll see in the next slide, the workflow is basically the same as it usually is. You create something, you edit it, you commit, you push, and then that change gets reflected in the website that you're interested in. And this either gives you an opportunity to update the things that you want to show people, or to allow other people to all work together on the same repository/website. All right, so the workflow is going to look very similar to the kinds of things that we would do in general. We're going to create a repository and an R project so that we can work with R Markdown inside of RStudio, and we can commit and push seamlessly to GitHub. And you're either going to start with a template website that's got sort of the bare bones stuff that you need, or you're going to know that you need to have a couple of specific files in your website, and you're going to generate those somehow. You have to tell GitHub that the repository is a website. In some very specific cases, it will try to know automatically that something is a website, but other times you have to be a little bit more clear. This is a website, and please treat it as such. And then beyond that, you're going to commit content and you're going to push. And that's going to be it. And that's how we're going to create websites. And so again, what I like about this in the context of things that we've seen up to this point is that creating websites is almost free. We're going to be using R Markdown, and we're going to be doing that inside of Git and GitHub repositories, and the product is going to be a website, and that I think is just really fantastic. So fantastic, great. We're going to go ahead and create a website. All right, so we're going to make a website, and we're actually going to start sort of at the very beginning of this workflow by creating the repository on GitHub. This is different enough from how you might have created repositories in the past that I just want to be really explicit about this part. So let me go to github.com, and I'm going to create this repository not under my personal GitHub account. I'm not going to be Jeff-Goldsmith on GitHub today. I'm going to be BSTP8105 on GitHub today, and we're going to create a web page for BSTP8105. And so this part is very similar, but I'm going to be a little bit more careful about the repository name. So the exact repository name, and cases matter and dashes matter and things like this, I'm going to use exactly bst-p8105.github.io. And the reason that I'm using this is so that later on, after I've created this repository, GitHub will know that anything that's structured as username.github.io should be the website that you're interested in. So in particular later, if I go to bst.p8105, or sorry, bst-p8105.github.io, it'll just be a website and I'll be able to see everything that's going on. For other repositories that you want to have rendered as a website, the name is also a little bit clearly structured. It would be this thing, bst-p8105.github.io / your repository name. So there's reason to keep your repository names like a little bit short, especially if you're planning something to be a website. But this is what I'm going to be interested in. So bst-p8105.github.io, again, very carefully, exact GitHub name, and then GitHub.io. And I'm going to, let's create a README. Make this public and create the repository. So that's great. And then from here, I'm going to do similar things that I do in the past. So I'm going to go to RStudio and make sure that I have this project locally from Git. And I'm going to call this, again, leave the name, all of this, everything's fine. Let me create this project. Okay. All right, so I've got the usual stuff here, and I guess I'm going to go ahead and commit everything that I've got just to say that I did. So let's say this is initial commit / RProject stuff. Okay, so I haven't done anything yet that is different from anything that I would normally do. I did see one small error there, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But before doing anything else, I'm gonna not worry about that for now. So what I want to do is get something that looks like a website, and there are a couple of things that you need to do. The first is we're gonna have to put in an R Markdown file, and we're gonna want that R Markdown file to render to HTML. But one of the things that websites, browsers, HTML, everything that sort of interacts with the web is very specific about is that the landing page for your website has to have a clear name. That has to be understood by browsers to be the page that gets rendered when you go to the web address. And so I'm going to have to name that something specific, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But first I'm going to say that for this part, I'm going to be drawing that same template that I showed in the slide presentation. I'm going to use that same template, and I'm going to find it at p8105.com/making websites. So here I'm going to download index.rmd, and over here in my browser, I'm sort of losing track of things. Let me move this over here so I remember where it is. And I'm going to put index.rmd into this directory. So that's great. And now let me open up index.rmd. Okay. So this is the same sort of snippet that I showed in a slide. It's got the YAML header, it's got a section title, and then it's got something that embeds this GIF into a page. Now, I mentioned that browsers are very concerned about making sure that a page is structured in a way that it understands, so that when the browser goes to bst-p8105.github.io, it knows which page is sort of the landing page for that site. And so the structure that we use, the structure that you have to use, the landing page for your site has to be called index with a lowercase i.html, and that's what's going to get treated as the website. So let me go ahead and knit this, and it's going to process. And again, this is creating something a little bit different than what we've seen. It's creating an HTML document that if I open up, gets shown in my web browser over here, and it sort of looks like what we sort of thought it was going to. My awesome website is the title, this is Jeff's awesome website is the section header, and this is the GIF that I've included. And so now let me see, what if I type some additional stuff? What if I add some text here? Is this going to work? So I'm going to knit, and it's going to show up off to the side. I'm sorry, it's going to show up in my web browser. Yeah, there's some text that I add here. Can I do other, R Markdown stuff? Here's a subsection, and here's some additional text. Because does this work? Yeah, right? Like at this point, I am just editing content, right? I've got my website, I've got the text, I've got this image that I put in, I've got some stuff here. And I'll talk a little bit more about the kind of text that you could put in, the kind of stuff that you could do. You can put in code chunks, you can put in anything that would normally go along with an R Markdown document. Congratulations, you can put it into this R Markdown document and it's going to render to HTML rather than to a GitHub document or a Word document or whatever. So that, I think, is pretty fantastic. And again, the key things that are different here is that I'm outputting an HTML document rather than a GitHub document. And I'm being very careful to call this index lowercase I .r markdown so that in my directory, sorry, wrong one, let me see if I can find it. In here, the thing that's being created by this is index.html, right? Index.html is the website that I'm interested in. Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit more about the kinds of content that you might want to put in here. You can put in code chunks. You know, here's our norm 10. Let's see what this does. You can knit. It's going to create a code chunk here, and it'll render as a code chunk and spit out the output. But very often on web pages, you want to do something a little bit different. Let's talk about, for example, linking. Let's link to, sorry, not a code chunk. Let's link to useful tools for data science. The first useful tool that I'm going to include a link to is Google, and then I'm going to give the link here. I think I have to be google.com, and let's just sort of see what happens. Let's also do the course website P8105, and I think if I do P8105.com, hopefully this will work also. So let me knit this and take a look at how it is in my browser. And then if I click on the link to Google, those are not quite working yet, sorry. Let me just go to Google and copy the full thing here. Okay, let's not tell a particular client. Just typing google.com didn't work because I hadn't specified that you actually need to go to the internet here with this HTTPS. So let me sort of copy that. That's, again, saying no. Let me try both of these and just check if I click, those work here. Okay, I'll knit again. All right, so you do have to be a little bit careful to make sure if you are including a link that you intend somebody to access on the internet, that you include the HTTPS and say, go to this part of the internet. So hopefully this is working now. Yeah, that takes me to Google, and yeah, that takes me to data science. Okay, great. So you can put in some links. Let's see, what else might we want to put in? I've already said I've added one image here, and if you see, this is also coming from online. This is being hosted somewhere else. If you wanted to do a local image, let's do a local image, and I'm going to be clear here, links to other websites. So let's say, when I say a local image, I mean a picture that is inside of the repository that you now want somebody to be able to see. So let's create one of these, and I'm going to be, you know, sort of organized about this. I'm going to create an images folder, and I found the picture that I'm going to put online, and obviously it's Ted. Here's Ted. Ted's doing Ted stuff. He's doing great. All right, let's just be clear about that. So I'm going to use the same structure. I think if I do these two brackets, the exclamation point, and then I give the path to the image that I'm interested in, images / and I think I called it ted.jpg, and gives me a little preview there. Hey buddy. All right, let's knit this and make sure that this is working still. Here's my preview image. Here's my cat Ted. Okay. All right, so I'm still creating stuff and adding content, and things are going great. What I'm going to do next actually is include an additional page in this site. Right? So I've got the index page, and I'm going to create another page that goes along with this. And let's just sort of copy and paste. I'm going to duplicate index.rmd, and instead of having it be index, I'm going to make an about page. And let me come over here to files. So I've added an about.rmd. Let me change this, about me. And I think I'll leave most of the rest of this together. So let's say this page has information about me. And I'm going to keep this short because whatever. Like you might want to put stuff on here. I'm going to say I teach P8105. Okay, that's all there is about me right now. All right, so now I've got an additional page in my site, but the problem is that if somebody went to my site, they wouldn't really have a way to get to this additional page. So what I need to provide is a link either from the landing page or some other way to navigate to a page that I want somebody to see. So now if I sort of say, let's do link to page within the site, I'm going to use the same kind of a structure where I use, this is about me, and here it's a little bit more direct. I can just link directly to the about.html. No HTTPS. I don't have to be like the whole long page what I'm doing. I just have to say this is the next page that I am interested in, and it is on my current website. So just go in here in this directory. Don't do anything crazy. Go to HTML, or sorry, go to about.html. And so I'm going to knit this. And let me open this up and take a look at what I've done so far in terms of building a website. Jeff's awesome website. There's Elmo. There's some text and a sample, and then I've got links to Google and P8105, and I've got, here's my cat, doing great, and I've got a link to a page within a site. So I guess there are a couple of things that I want to be clear about. So first I'll click this and make sure, yes, it takes me to an additional page, and now I can navigate back, and I can sort of click around and do things that I need to. The table of contents that I referenced in the page-specific YAML is here, and it's showing this is Jeff's awesome website, and it's got navigation. I can click to the local image, and it'll take me down there. And this is floating to the side in the sense that as I scroll up and down, it stays, it sort of follows along with me. It's floating along as well. So that's sort of where in the HTML document, there's the HTML, there's the table of contents true and the table of contents float, and it's sort of structured this as sections and subsections, and so you can change how this looks. It sort of keeps in mind what's going on. Here's a subsection, sorry, links to other thing, Jeff's awesome site, subsection, so on, right? Like it's a table of contents that keeps track of sections and subsections, and that's all pretty great also. So fantastic. We still haven't solved the problem of like, is this on the internet? But we have locally created a website that's got an index page, a landing page with some content that we can edit in normal R Markdown ways. And then we've also got a second about page that's going to allow me to keep track of some of the information about me. And I've got a link here to that extra about page, and all of that is really important. So what we're going to do next is update a couple of things. The first is, instead of trying to keep track, at least for some things, of specific YAML stuff here, and then do I need to keep track of the same stuff here, yes or no, we're going to create a site-wide YAML, and that site-wide YAML is going to define some features that exist everywhere across my web page. And we'll see two major elements of that. One of them has to do with the overall look and design of the website, and the other has to do with the navigation around that website. And so what I'm going to create here, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this a text file. And I am going to copy and paste the site YML from this the making websites page. And you see there's a whole section here on site YML. And I'm just going to copy and paste this information into this document. And now I'm going to save this. Again, I have to be very specific about how this is being saved. I have to call it _ site.yml. And if I save this into my usual directory, you see it recognizes this is a YML document. It sort of knows something that's going on here. And I'm naming my website Yay Internet. The output directory is this directory, stuff don't really worry about. And I've got a couple of other things here. First, it's going to output HTML documents, and I'm setting the theme here to be cerulean. So I'm going to actually take that out here, and I'm going to take that out here. Let me save both of these. I've got my site YML, and everything is great so far. And then there's this other piece. There's a long list here called navbar, and it's got title, and then it's got something off to the right, and we'll say about, and then some icons and some other stuff. And so let me actually just go to the index page and knit this and see what happens. So again, opening this up in my browser, the main thing that has changed, like everything below this blue bar is the same as it was, but now on the left-hand side, I've got a home thing that if I click, maybe it'll do something, and I've got a link to an about page, and I've got this little window that says, this little button that says, great, create an email, and this button that navigates to somewhere else. So let me, again, just be clear. The site YML is including that navigation bar across the top of the website, and it's saying the left-hand side is home. The first entry is going to be home, and if you click on that, hopefully any page in your website, that'll take you back to index. The next thing I've got is about, and I am including what that link should be to. This href says this is the text and this is the link, and it's taking me to about.html. I'll check on that in just a minute. This icon business, we can talk a little bit more about. This is using a particular font from Font Awesome FA. This is the envelope and the large version of the envelope. And I am including here that it should send an email. And if I were doing this, I would maybe change this to, bst-p8105 @ gmail.com, so that if somebody clicks that little envelope, it's going to pop up an email to send to bstp8105. And then I've got a link to, again, the Font Awesome GitHub icon, the large version, and the link here is github.com/whatever your name is. So let's change this to bst-p8105. All right, so let me, again, I'm going to knit this, and I'm going to knit this to make sure that both pages have the same index. So let me sort of reknit here and open again. And I'm not going to click to send myself an email because I don't really want to, but if I click here on GitHub, it takes me to bst-p8105 GitHub page. Somebody now can find me. If I click on About, it takes me to the About page, tells me I teach P8105. If I click Home, it takes me back home. All right, so now I've got a navigation bar that allows me to keep track of a variety of different things that are going on this course webpage, this webpage, and that allows me to sort of navigate around to things that I'm interested in. Now, again, a lot of this stuff is just sort of similar interface. It's R Markdown with a little bit of extra YML business and a little bit of extra thought about how you structure a web page, what content do you put on the index, and where do you put the about, and what do some of these links do, and how do you sort of navigate around that stuff, the structure. How am I going to organize things on a website for somebody else to think about? That matters, but the process that we're using, the actual tools that we're using, is mostly R Markdown stuff. And again, we're doing all of this inside of the RStudio interface. So, all right, great. So I've mentioned here, let me sort of go back to making websites because there are some useful links here. So I've got a link to the entire Font Awesome collection, and these are usually things that you can sort of access. Some of them, I guess the Abacus, you have to be a pro user, but if you wanted to say that this is an advertisement, okay. And there are a lot of icons in here, and you can sort of scroll through and see what are the things that you actually want to use, okay. I'm also going to point out that most of the stuff that I've put together so far, site YML, index, about, and I think that might be it. There is also a template website if you want to click here and download this template so that you don't have to worry so much about where everything is. Here it shows up. So my website template has a lot of the same content. It's got index, it's got about, and it's got the site YML. So, okay. Fantastic. Now, one of the things that I did briefly when I wanted to make sure that both the About page and the index page were updated according to something with the site YML, I had to go through and reknit this page and reknit this page. And that wasn't the most burdensome thing in the world. But it turns out, like, if you have another couple of pages and you want to make sure that some new element in your navbar or some change to the output gets transmitted to all of those documents, knitting each of these is actually sort of a hassle. And so I'm going to take a hot break and I'm going to close this out and I'm going to reopen that R project. And the cool thing that has happened is that in addition to environment history, connections, and Git, I've now got this build panel. Every time from here on out, I open up this project, RStudio is going to say like, well, you've got index.html, you must be putting together a website. And if you click build website, it is going to re-render every single page that you have. And so some update to your site YML, you might then go to build and build the whole website from scratch and make sure that everything works the way that you want it to. So that I think is pretty fancy as well. Now, I have not been doing much Git committing up to this point, and now I'm actually going to do that. So let me see. In addition to the site YML and the about stuff, there is some support information here that has been added when I created this as a website and added in my site YML. So if you double check now, I've got site libraries, and there's a lot of stuff in here that you shouldn't touch or worry about. So I've mentioned Font Awesome. Don't worry about it. I'll talk about Bootstrap in just a minute. And then there's some jQuery, user interface, navigation, other stuff. There's CSS files, there's JavaScript files, there's all kinds of stuff going on down in here. Don't worry about any of it. Let's just commit everything. Okay, so this is got a pretty good website going here. Pretty good. Okay. Now, there is like one small thing. In anything that you're doing at this point, you would click push. And in the same way that you always would, you would click push and it would get sent on to GitHub and everything would be fine. I have to do something a little bit different because I am working on this in the BST P8105 account where my default account is Jeff-Goldsmith. So my push process right now is going to be a little bit different from what you might use in general. And so I've got here a command, git push, something, 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 something. Don't worry about this. This is not something that you need to worry about in general. This is what I have to do in this particular example to push to a different account from my normal one. But it says, okay, it's done all of that process. So let me go back over to BST P8105 and it says, okay. And it's got like a yellow light here that is probably informative. It's checked pass. The page build, GitHub Pages successfully built your site and done some other stuff. Okay, I've got my 3 commits, and so far things are going okay. And I'm actually, just to be clear, I'm going to check in settings. Let me make sure. Let's see, features. I can never remember exactly. So, all right, it's in the main page and you have to scroll down and here to GitHub Pages. GitHub Pages is designed to host your personal organization or project pages from a GitHub repository. And it's done a lot of the stuff that I need it to because I named my repository BST P8105.github.io. If I had a different repository name, if I had a website for a different project that I was interested in, sometimes you have to go into GitHub Pages and tell it, please build the site from the main branch or from the master branch, see what's going on, choose a theme, don't worry about any of this. If you want a custom domain, if you want it to be jeffgoldsmith.com or p8105.com, you do have to do a little bit of additional work there. But right now, if I just go to bst p8105.github.io, here is my site. And I want to be clear, like this is kind of wild in the sense that if I just put this link somewhere, if I sent this link to anybody else in the world, and I said, you should go to bst p8105.github.io, they're going to go to this and they're going to see exactly the stuff that I had just done. So I've got my text, I've got my random sample, I've got links to other websites, and these will take me to Google and to p8105.com. I'm showing the world TED, and I am just thrilled about that. And I can navigate to about, and I can go back to GitHub, and I can do all of this stuff, right? So I have actually put together now a full website in HTML, hosted it as a website. It is viewable as a website. Everything is like websited up, and I am thrilled about this because I've done all of it inside of RStudio and GitHub in the space of, I don't know, I haven't really kept track of time, but it's felt kind of fast to put together a whole website here. So believe it or not, that's mostly it, at least in terms of basics. I mean, there are a couple of things that'll sort of point out. You can embed direct HTML if you want to. And so here, if instead I wanted to use something instead of like this default version of TED, you can put in actual HTML code if you want to. So I'm going to use the image tag, and I'm going to tell it that the source is images/ted.jpg. And one of the reasons that you might want to do this is so that you can do something like style, modify the style of this directly. Let's say that width is 75%. And I think this is going to work. So I'm going to take out the sort of R Markdown version of a figure, and I'm going to put in the HTML version of that figure. And so let me knit this and make sure this works. It did not work here. Let me open. Ooh, did I break something? Images. That's weird. I'm double checking my code here to see. Sorry, this is I have a cheat sheet for how to write this, and I think I have to use the right thing. Source src instead of so, right? That was what my problem was. And so all right, so here's my cat Ted inside of this page. Let me check. The rest of it's all fine. And so you might sort of wonder, like, why would you do this? Well, it's sometimes a little bit easier to control the styling of an image, to center it in a page, or to add a border around, or to control the size. It's sometimes easier to use HTML directly. And this is one example, again, like images or something where having HTML under your belt, a little bit of HTML can be useful, but it is, as we've seen, absolutely not required. The other thing that I'm going to point out, let's go, suppose you look at this website and you think like, all right, it is crazy that I am able to just put stuff on the internet. You know, no one's, the boss of the internet isn't checking out what I've done and telling me like, yes or no, you can put this online. I'm just like making websites, and that's great. But like this blue and white background business is just not your style. That's not really what you want to do. So you might think to yourself like, can I do something else? And the answer is yes. And again, this is looking at the Making Websites page on P8105. So you can, for example, change your default theme using Bootswatch. And so if you check out what are the free themes for Bootstrap, here Cerulean is one of those, Cosmo is one of those, Cyborg is one of those, Flatly is one of those. You can sort of scroll through here and see, do any of these sort of, you know, work for you better than the Cerulean theme does? And so let's just sort of come over here and change my HTML theme from Cerulean to Flatly. I'm going to save this, and just to make sure that it works everywhere, I'm going to rebuild my website. Right? And so now I've got, if I open up this page, it's a different theme. It's a different shade of blue, and now we've got a darker thing here. And since I rebuilt my website, it applies to the About page as well. And it's sort of, you know, you hover over this thing and it goes to a greenish instead of whatever color it had been before, right? So you can change the look of your website using some of these different themes. You have to be a little bit careful. Well, a little bit careful. The Bootswatch is based on Bootstrap, and Bootstrap gets updated every now and then, and the RStudio implementation, or the thing that is most directly accessible via RStudio, is a couple of instances behind the most recent kind of Bootstrap themes that you might end up with. So every now and then you come in here and you say like, oh, I'd really like to pick something like this, or I've come across another theme online and I tried that, and for whatever reason, it just didn't work at all. Sometimes that helps, and again, there's a thread linked to on the P8105 website about what this problem is and how you might do it. Now, you can, I guess I want to be clear, I mentioned in a previous video on accessing, reading data from the web, I mentioned briefly that the way these sort of styling for web pages works is that you write your HTML and then there's CSS files that go along with that. And really what we're doing here is saying use a collection of CSS files to style the HTML that's going along with this. And you can write your own CSS files. You can think like, I want to be exceptionally particular about the font that gets used and the colors that show up in the background, and what happens when you put a mouse over a link. I want it to do this instead of this other thing. You can create your own CSS files and I have to say that I 100% don't recommend it. And I'm speaking from experience. I have spent a lot of time in the good old days, like thinking, oh, I'm going to pick the colors on my website and it's going to be like really great. It's a rabbit hole that you can fall down, and usually after a year or two, you spend a lot of time coming up with something that you like a lot. After a year or two, you're sort of tired of it, and then you want to change it, and that's just additional work. So what I really recommend is to find a theme that you like the best among the themes that are available and use that theme and just move on with your life, right? Don't worry so much about some of this other stuff. So what are some of the other things that I would recommend about building websites? So I've mentioned occasionally knowing some HTML can get you out of trouble if you want to do something very particular. You should also think a little bit about the themes that you're interested in. In general, I would recommend one of the things that you will start to recognize moving forward, you'll go to a website on a data science kind of thing, and you'll look at it and you'll say, that looks very much, now that I know what I'm looking at, that looks like the kind of website that was built using R Markdown and hosted on GitHub. And if you see an element of a website that you're interested in, go to GitHub and click around until you find the R Markdown for the page that you like and see how somebody inserted a thing that you're interested in, and use that, copy and paste, take it from that thing and use it on your own website. That, for example, I think is how originally I ended up with the envelope and GitHub links via Font Awesome. I saw it on somebody's site and I was like, that looks neat. How'd they do that? And you go to the YML and you find the thing and you copy over and you sort of cross your fingers that it's going to work, and then it does. And that's how it works. And if it doesn't work, sometimes you have to tweak things, but that's a useful process to have. I think the next tip that I would have about building sites, again, isn't so much about what tools you might use or how you're going to do things. It's about how you should structure your website. A big piece of usefulness in a website is how things are laid out. Is it obvious where somebody should go to click on a thing that they need to see? Is the links at the top, are they clear and informative? Have you included a reasonable amount of text or content on a page? And especially on your landing page, very often, whatever your landing page is, you're not going to want to have 8 paragraphs of information. You want to say well, this is what the page is about, and if you want to learn more about this, here's a link, and if you want to learn more about that, here's this other link, and if you want to see more about my research interest, well, I got a page for that too, right? That's the kind of the way. Think a little bit about what websites that you see that are similar to the things that you were trying to construct for yourself. What do you see that works reasonably well, and try to match not just the look or the specific elements. Try to understand what is it about the content and the layout and the structure that is useful for you. And that's most of what I want to say about that. I guess I am going to open up here again a link on the course website, the RStudio guide, and it's talking about site generation and other things like this. It looks like they've reorganized where things are. What I really want to focus on is something like the HTML document kind of output from R Markdown. And so we've seen here table of content, and you can modify the table of content. You can have sort of floating. Let's see, you can do section numberings, yes or no. You can do tabbed sections. So for example, if you wanted somebody to be able to click here by product or by region you can have different kinds of tabs. This is the kind of thing where you might say, okay, great, I want to have this be tab set, and I can copy and paste maybe all of this stuff over to my own page and see what happens. Let's just sort of knit and see what this looks like. It gives me tab content, and I'll just sort of double check. This is my first tab, and I can do stuff. And by region, this is my second tab, and it does other stuff. And then let's sort of get out of all of that tab business by saying this is a new section, and it's really great. So I'm just sort of playing around here. Let's see what this page looks like. I've got here the link to the About Me page, but I've also got quarterly results, and I can go from product to region, and both of these can be as long as they want to before moving on to a new section. So that turns out to be kind of useful. There's stuff in here about appearance and style, I'm not going to worry so much about that. Again, you can check out what's going on. You can talk about how you're going to print data frames. You use code folding. This turns out, I think, to be a useful option in some cases. So here I'm actually just going to sort of take a quick look at what happens if I add code folding to my HTML document. So let me open this up again. So here it says code up at the top, show all code or hide all code. And here it's sort of showing the output of my code, but not showing the code itself. And so I get some interactivity here if I want to, put together something that I think many people who are going to look at this are not really going to want to see all of the code that I'm interested in. Rather than just removing it or keeping it in entirely, you can say, like, let's hide it most of the time so that interested people can click and actually look at the code that you have. Those are the kinds of things, again, you will either start to see by reading something here, or you will see output that somebody else has done and think to yourself, boy, that's nice. I wish I knew how to hide all of my code. Let me just go see what their R Markdown looks like and try to figure that piece out. That's sort of what I mean when I say use this as a way, use like the things that you see, use that as a way to improve your own Markdown documents and your own websites and things like this. So I'm going to go ahead, let me just sort of rebuild my whole website. And again, like this stuff is just sort of crazy to me, in the sense that here, let me, I don't know what I'm doing, updates to content and style. What's crazy about this is that all I've done now is modified some stuff in R Markdown and RStudio, and I've ended up with a website as a result. And again, I have to push personally at this time in a way that's a little bit different than I would generally. But now I've sort of pushed all of this stuff online, and if I go to bst p8105.github.io. It takes GitHub a minute to update things, but hopefully before too long, this will actually end up being something that reflects the changes that I have just made. And again, it takes GitHub a minute or two to do that. So, all right, we're not going to wait forever for GitHub to change how things look, but take my word for it. I have committed and pushed, and eventually if you navigate to this website, it's going to look the way that you expect it to. And that's, I think, all that we're going to say about websites. I'm thrilled about this. I hope you're excited about this. I hope you're like, this is awesome. I get to make a website and put things on the internet. Awesome. Great. Thanks very much for following along. And see, there it is. Got it.